Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with everybody. Thanks for the invitation again. And all right, let's start. Basically, the main thing I want to present here is kind of the results of two papers that I want to mesh up together and come up with kind of new knowledge out of it, I guess, or new ideas. And these two papers were published this year. One is kind of proposing a circular society, degrowth-oriented circular society, and what it entails. And the other one is looking at some cities that call themselves circular and that have done some circular planning, which is Amsterdam, Glasgow, and Copenhagen, and having like a critical degrowth perspective on what they have done. So basically, by combining the two, I tried to think about what degrowth-oriented circular society for the city scale could look like, and what kind of policies could bring that about, and just kind of open up the discussion about what that could entail, what that means. All right, so we all know more or less about circular economy. Just very briefly, it's kind of come up as the panacea, one-size-fits-all solution to pretty much every problem ever faced by humankind, and especially those of the 21st century, like resource scarcity, climate change, food scarcity, environmental degradation, unemployment, and economic stagnation. I mean, really, it's supposed to do everything. I mean, it would do your laundry if you asked for it. But obviously, it's facing main challenges in delivering all these expectations, right? And one of the main kind of problems that I have with the concept is just this idea of what's so circular about a circular economy. So like, what cycles do we think about when we think about a circular economy? Like what loops, what flows, what circles are we talking about? And what I found through research is that there are many relevant flows and cycles that could be addressed or could be taken into account when we do this, right? In fact, human societies and our entire planet function through cycles and flows. I mean, cycles and flows are, from urban scholars, you've got the urban metabolism that, is very, very clear that our planet and social systems function through cycles and flows. So I was kind of digging this up, and I found 7 cycles that I found relevant to at least understanding sustainability, circularity in a broad sense. And these are biogeochemical cycles, ecosystem cycles, resource cycles, economic cycles, political cycles, social cycles of care, and then finally knowledge flows or knowledge cycles. So yeah, let's get into all of these one by one just to kind of get to the main idea of what I understand as a circular kind of society that kind of takes into account all these 7 cycles. So first, biogeochemical cycles. I think we all kind of know what it is from Biology 101, right? The Earth functions through many cycles. We've got the water, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen cycles, etc. And they basically enable the circulation of matter and energy through the Earth's crust, right? And obviously, we are seriously disrupting these cycles, especially the carbon cycle, causing climate change, but also nitrogen and phosphorus cycles, seriously impeding our ability to produce sufficient nutritious food and also affecting our ecosystems. Then we've got the ecosystem cycles, and this is through which energy goes through the food web. So energy and nutrients flow through ecosystems as well as cycles, as flows. They enter as sunlight. Energy enters as sunlight and then goes through the different trophic levels of the food web. Obviously, these enable basically the flourishing of life on planet Earth, and obviously provide key functions and services that enable also our humanity and our societies to function, but we're also weakening them and collapsing them. As we know, we're in the midst of a 6th massive extinction, right? Actually, our weakening of these 2 cycles that are clearly really relevant is seen as the overshoot of the planetary boundaries. And from 3 boundaries crossed in 2009, we're now crossing 6 boundaries. And unfortunately, we might very soon cross the rest. Beyond these 2 cycles, then there's resource cycles. Resource cycles is basically what we most commonly understand when people talk about circular economy, right? And this is just the cycles of natural resources that are extracted from nature, brought into the economy, brought into society, processed, transformed, used and then thrown away or recycled, reused in some way, right? Once again, there is a lot of problems when these flows are not safely cycled back to nature, or when we over-extract resources beyond their replenishing rate. And obviously, there's also scarcities that may occur when non-renewable resources are overexploited, right? And this is the case now. This is basically a short table saying how many resources we have left for a lot of things. We've got copper. There's only 100 years left of copper. And this is with current rates of use, which is quite scary because copper is essential for the energy transition. Then we've got gold, only 150 years, nickel, 450 years, zinc. All these are essential minerals for the energy transition, once again. Not many years left. And obviously, coal, oil, and gas, 50 years left, perhaps, which is a good thing. It sounds like a good thing, but is a terrifying thing because our economies are definitely not ready for it. In any case, these show like that the overshoot of our resource cycles, you know, in the traditional circular economy sense. And there's this annual circular economy gap report that shows that we're currently recycling them only at 7.2%, right? And actually that figure is lower than last year, I think. I think last year it was like 8%. In any case, we're far from using them in a sustainable rate. So yeah, that's the classic way that we understand circularity, right? But there are many other things, right? Now we've got economic cycles of wealth, capital, and money, and we've all seen, of course, how money flows through economy. Money, wealth flows through economy, change hands from governments, households, businesses, etc. And obviously, once again, when money stops flowing and starts accumulating in too few hands or in too few companies, we've got unsustainable inequalities of power, and all of that obviously prevent the economy from running for the benefit of humanity as a whole, and obviously just cause kind of strongholds in the economy that simply stop making it sustainable. And this is obviously the case now with top 10% of the global population now owns 76% of all wealth, while the bottom 50% owns just 2%. There's this recent figure by Oxfam that is quite telling of this inequality and the impacts that this has not only on just economic and well-being, but also on planetary well-being, in the sense of the top 1% being responsible, top 10%, sorry, being responsible for 50% of emissions, which is staggering. I mean, if we just get rid of the top 10% and just make them consume like a normal person, we would kind of like already address half the emissions problems that we had, right? So it just comes to show how important these cycles are, and yet they're not often included in our discussions of circularity, or at least it's not type of cycles that are taken into account. Then we have political cycles of power, and then here basically it's how power is distributed in the governance processes, right? It can go bottom up, top down. We've got different branches of government. We've got election processes that circulate power, but right now the balance of power between all levels is pretty unsustainable, as we've got basically these running games between public and private institutions and money that gets into public areas and prevents basically governance processes from benefiting humanity as a whole. So this lack of flows, this lack of kind of circulation of power is also a huge problem to the kind of sustainability in general, but just to human societies. And obviously we have elements to prevent that, but they're not being used enough, right? Especially citizen assemblies, participatory budgeting processes might be good ways to improve the circulation, which is not happening. Finally, we've got knowledge flows. These are the flows, obviously, of human knowledge. We build, obviously, from over 300,000 years of human kind of evolution, history on Earth. Homo sapiens has been on Earth for 300,000 years, and we're a product of whatever that came about, with all the sharing of technologies, of knowledge, of ways of life, and of social innovations as much as technological innovations. So, and that free flow is key, right? Through education that is free, open, available to all, and obviously publishing, open access and having technologies being open access. But right now there's a lot of patents and privatization, commodification of knowledge that prevents this from happening, obviously. And knowledge has been accumulated in certain hands, especially AI technologies, for example, the vaccine technology, obviously, when COVID happened. And now, just now, we are in a stronghold of sort of knowledge that is benefiting some people and not others through this university system that is in the global north. So the knowledge that we're making here is benefiting a certain country, certain people in certain geographical areas of certain origin, but the same quality education isn't necessarily available to other people elsewhere. And obviously that threat leads not only to inequalities, but also threatens the ability to even think and shape a ecological transition that is so needed, because a lot of the technologies and the new innovations are being kept in the hands of a few. So finally, but not least, the cycles of care. Now, cycles of care occur, of course, every day in our homes, in our communities, in our ecosystems, and they basically are often invisible and unvalued, but they are the essential kind of building blocks of civilization, of human societies, essentially, right? They enable the education of people, the nutritious food. They enable the basically protection of biodiversity through indigenous peoples that hold relationships of care with their traditional lands. They allow for the maintenance of our mental and physical health as we care for each other, for our friends, for our families, and as we have healthcare systems that also care for us. And obviously they allow us to share key resources and tools and infrastructures which are useful for a circular economy in a very kind of resource efficiency way, as a lot of care practices such as urban agriculture, tool sharing libraries, local help groups where people share cars or share housing, like co-housing ideas. All these are structures of care that are key for circularity or sustainability, and yet they're not often talked about in the literature, right? These cycles of care, these loops of care. And Una isn't here today, but she's a good friend of me and Fede, and she talks very well about these cycles of care and their importance. So right now, obviously, these cycles are being commoditized and neglected. Commoditized by being privatized and taken into private realm, or neglected by lack of funding for public education, free and equal access public education, obviously public healthcare that is sufficient and access and available to everyone, but also social security systems and other forms of care that are provisioned through society, right? So essentially, this is like a figure that is proposed as a summary of all these cycles. And as you can see in the figure, they're all interrelated. They're all deeply interconnected. And the idea here is, okay, if we think about circularity, it matters to think about at least all these cycles. But I do admit that there are many other cycles that are probably relevant that I haven't included here. I've tried to summarize it in 7 cycles that are at least are vital to kind of what we need to, from our thinking of what is necessary for a circular future, for a sustainable future, in a critical degrowth sense, obviously. But yeah, there might be other things. So I'm just kind of, and it's a minimum though, I would say, at a bare minimum. And it's quite telling that right now the main dominant visions of what a circular economy is only address 1 to 3 of these 7 cycles. Mostly the resource cycle, sometimes ecosystem, and sometimes biogeochemical cycles, but not always, to be honest. So essentially this, I would say, shows how growth-oriented circular economy approaches just lack of understanding of our system. They just don't understand how human systems function. They don't, because they only want to address one cycle, the resource cycle, yet it's just part of how we can understand the interminglages and the interlocations of different things that matter for a circular economy, right? And so some R's are being overemphasized, like reuse, repair, refurbish, remanufacture, very kind of eco-efficiency, technologically oriented R's. And others are not recognized, they're just not even talked about, especially redistribute, reevaluate, redemocratize, reconceptualize. By reconceptualize here, this is an R proposed by Serge Latouche, which is one of the main thinkers of degrowth, who said that we have to reconceptualize what we understand as a good life. What is poverty? What is wealth? What is being a human in this planet, right? Reevaluate is about what we give value to. Do we give value to cycles of care or to economic processes that generate profit, right? So all these R's are completely neglected, even though they are present in the literature. So essentially, a lot of systemic elements are left out: democratizing power, redistributing wealth, strengthening care networks, sharing technologies and knowledge, downscaling resource over production and over consumption, or relocalizing production, and then respecting and regenerating natural cycles of the biosphere, right? All of these things are just kind of being neglected by neglecting these other cycles. So we've got this growth-oriented discourses that just kind of propose this vision of circular economy. We have this eco mall, everybody is like working very efficiently in suits, and everybody has a Tesla and like an autonomous flying robot. And this is essentially like Elon Musk's idea of like the perfect future, right? Where, this kind of techno-optimist narrative is being promoted through circularity that however, this is kind of obviously a technocentric fairy tale of eternal economic growth, right? There is no possibility of perfect loops. It is not physically possible because it breaks the laws of thermodynamics, right? And as we've seen, we've had since Rio 1992, 30 years of this techno-oriented narrative being implemented, and the Earth overshoot day has not gotten any closer. We used to consume 1 Earth in the 1970s, now at 1.7 Earths. So we're basically continuing like a debt towards future generations, essentially, and the people in the global south whose livelihoods are being kind of privatized, or kind of are not being deprived of, so that we might have our way of living, so that we might continue our way of life. And by we, I mean not necessarily here in the room, but mainly the 1%. So basically, this narrative lacks scientific validity, social relevance, and political legitimacy. It's obviously kind of a neo-colonial construction and construct. So instead of that perfect future, it's more likely to bring this kind of future, where you have a complete depletion of natural resources in the south and sustainability for those that can afford it in the north. And it's going to look a little bit more like this, perhaps, like a fortress Europe, which isn't too far already from what is happening now, with the walls being built in North America and Eastern Europe, with the Mediterranean being kind of militarized, and the refugee camps from climate catastrophes happening on our borders while we live our highly efficient Tesla lives. So I propose a different kind of narrative, a degrowth-oriented circular society, where we might live in harmony with other more than human inhabitants of our cities and of our planet, and all humans that occupy this earth. And so the idea of like a degrowth-oriented circular society is kind of an umbrella concept, and the idea here is to draw attention to the fact that there are many alternative visions and conceptualizations of circularity, like buen vivir, there's degrowth, and all of these can be kind of included in this umbrella that is in continuous development and creation. And at the same time, we expand the focus from a capitalocentric idea of a circular economy alone to that of a more holistic understanding of society as a whole, right, with all the different cycles that matter within a society. And at the same time, by keeping this cycle, the circular idea, it could be useful to just improve the fact that, and the understanding, the awareness that actually our societies do function through cycles. And that systemic understanding of cycles might be relevant to help us kind of understand how ecological functions occur and how human societal functions also occur, how wealth might be distributed, how power might be taken back into people's hands. So essentially, going back to the figure, we could say that a sustainable circular society, a degrowth-oriented circular society, specifically, not only circulates resources sustainably, but also care, knowledge, power, and wealth in radically democratic and redistributive manners. So what does this mean for urban planning? And essentially, I came up with a few from the other paper. So this is where the other paper really comes in. I looked at all the policies, well, not all of the policies, but I tried to look at all the possible policies with all the concepts related to circular and sustainable at the urban scale. So I looked at degrowth policies and kind of combined them, and this is like a mesh-up of the things that I found most relevant and most lacking also in the policies of Amsterdam, Glasgow, and Copenhagen that I looked at specifically. And what did I find most kind of lacking is first that there were very few participatory mechanisms for really the true governance and implementation of this transition, right? And this is perhaps the most important and first thing. The transition doesn't have to be imposed from the top down, but rather it has to be created, right? In an urban scale, it's a really effective scale to provide this participatory process because it is a scale where people are. You can actually meet human beings at an urban scale. And participatory budgeting is one of these tools that allows us to create participatory budgets at the city scale where we can redistribute actually wealth from the public and the private spheres into the sphere of the social and solidarity economy, essentially giving it to the citizens and asking citizens to decide how money is spent rather than having governments choose for us, or rather having the private sector do it. And obviously participatory budgeting has been implemented in many places in different ways, in different manners, but when it's well implemented, it can be quite transformative, especially when it includes the use of like at least 100% of the investment budget of the city. Often it's not, it's like 10 to 5% of the budget, and it doesn't have much meaning, and citizens don't even participate, because what is the point in like taking like 1 million euros or something? But when we actually decide on the entire city's budget, it can be transformative. Of course, we have citizen assemblies. This is random selections of citizens. So you select 150 random citizens of any city, and you get them to decide on the shape and form of the new plan for net zero by 2050. And this sometimes it's done through deliberative councils where specific issues are done. So it's the same idea where you randomly select citizens, but you do instead of having them choose on a very broad policy for long term, you get them to choose on specific plans, for example, for a specific neighborhood or a specific policy area like housing, etc. In any case, this is the kind of ways that we saw very much lacking in the policies of these cities, where there were some inclusion, some participation, but never was the last and the final word given to citizens. It was always these kinds of elements, places where you would collect simply just kind of proposals and ideas, but never really give the final vote to citizens, right? Then finally, another policy that we found lacking is this idea of circulating money, wealth, and knowledge, right, through these cycles. And this is done specifically through cooperative systems of the so-called social and solidarity economy that you might have heard of. And so like the city of Preston has done really interesting work on this, and other cities in the US like Portland have done so with really good results. And essentially what the cities have done is they've taken public procurement policies and they've used them to support social and solidarity economy initiatives, basically worker-owned nonprofit cooperatives. So instead of sourcing, I don't know, pencils from a massive corporation that makes pencils, they just have a cooperative that creates pencils locally with locally sourced resources, and that is a cooperative. When the cooperative doesn't exist for that product yet, making it, creating that cooperative, fostering it, creating new jobs for least advantaged groups of the population, and fostering that social and solidarity sector. Then we've got obviously financial support for the social and solidarity economy. There's a lot of financial support right now for new kind of competitive circular businesses right now. And all this money is like, it's pretty good, but it's really just going to increase the competitiveness of our city, like increase economic growth. That's the main idea. But really, we can also support these systems instead of putting the money into systems that only increase growth. These systems might increase local livelihoods. And obviously, another way that cities have a big role is just providing no rent or low rent spaces for these initiatives, right? It could be also for repair cafes, for local tool libraries, and for other community initiatives, for local bike cooperative workshops, stuff like that. So then we've got obviously ensuring access to sustainable housing for all, right? And preventing unfair accumulation of building stock. This is a huge problem in Amsterdam. And basically, there are a few ways that I found within the degrowth literature that was important, specifically related to this. Speculation vacancy taxes, essentially. So if you're not using your housing we tax it higher. Another point would just be limits to housing ownership per capita, right? Like how many houses can you actually own? Should there be massive corporations that own a lot of housing and then just speculate with it and rent them out in the private market? That could be illegal. You could also put limits on new housing size. So okay, you want to make a new construction, but well, how much space do you actually really need for like a family of 4? I don't know. You can limit that. You don't need a massive build new castles for the mega rich, right? Obviously, then we can just go to simply expropriation, repurposing. Unused buildings, right? If there's a building that is not being used for a social purpose, it can be expropriated and it can be reused for something that is much more socially meaningful. And finally, of course, we've got insulation and renovation schemes, but not those where it's just like we give incentives for you to insulate and renovate. And of course, we know how important it is to do this, but it's more like neighborhood by neighborhood, like public funding to just insulate all the houses in a neighborhood, one after the other, in a massive scale. And this I've seen by a few urban scholars that are really kind of pushing for this kind of scheme to really make sure the insulation happens. Otherwise, it's just those that can afford it that are insulating their houses, essentially. All right. Then finally, we've got for more at the urban form, kind of the shape of the city. We know how much space cars take, essentially, and how much that destroys and shapes the form of a city. Even in a place like Amsterdam or in cities in the Netherlands where there's a lot of bike lanes, really, the car takes a massive role and occupies so much space. So the idea is building multifunctional neighborhoods where we don't need a car at all. Obviously, building quality public transport, safe access to key services. And this sounds like obvious, but it's not even mentioned in any of the circular economy policies of the 3 cities I talked about. Even though these cities probably have really good policies in that regard, they don't think it's a circular policy. But this is probably the way by which you do the most reduction in material footprint. By limiting car use, you free up so much space. You really create circular flows, right? They don't even mention this. It's like, well, what is this? What is circularity about then for these cities? Well, obviously it's about growth, right? So it's a different purpose. Anyways, so I had to put it there because it's so important, even though it's so obvious, right? And then obviously there's conserving, restoring local biodiversity, and you can strictly protect green areas, create urban agriculture, transform gray infrastructure into green infrastructure. And this is where car use kind of is really problematic because most of the gray infrastructure that is useless is used for cars, like parking lots, highways, roads, etc. Right? So there's a lot of possibility here to kind of green our cities through this getting rid of cars or the kind of useless space that's built for cars, useless from a sustainability standpoint. And then I like this. This picture is from a comic book called Archiborescence by a Belgian comic artist. And he drew kind of a city where there are no roads, there are not cars. And it's so much greener. And this is based in, I think, Paris. But anyways, it's kind of a good shape of what a city could be if we really took this seriously. Okay, and then finally, this is the last slide. It's basically fostering social cultural transformation, right? So obviously now the cultural system and the kind of ways by which we are brought to value our lives, as degrowth literature has well pointed out, is through this vision of individuality, competitiveness, egoism, and basically these capitalist values, right? And so how can we create a society that values other non-capitalist values, essentially, like conviviality, sharing, solidarity, and just build slower and healthier lives? And, well, cities do have a big role here because they can promote community-owned media sources like radio stations and TV stations as well, and just different forms of promoting communication that is not privatized, not commoditized, and not for profit. Then they could do restrictions on advertising. The kind of advertising that we're exposed to in cities is brutal. I mean, it's affecting our mental well-being, and of course, helping us overshoot every single planetary boundary. So restricting advertising is key in that regard. And actually, that would free up quite a bit of space for greening on top of that. And then finally, environmental education and kind of promotion of these ecocentric values and community ethics that can be done in schools, community centers, urban agriculture projects, urban gardening, tool libraries, and etc. Right? So yeah, that's all. So for more information, these are the articles that I kind of based this on, and they have much more info on these things that I just presented. So I welcome you to check them out, and that's it.